Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Jams and Tea Podcast's 1991 Retrospective, where we discuss important albums that were released in the year 1991. This, I believe, is our 11th episode of this series, and we've been plugging through these records pretty well, talking about records that have been significant in various different ways, for various different reasons, and for various different parts of music and wider culture in 1991. But now we get to a point in that year where we discuss a series of records that were released on exactly the same day. And it's regarded as one of the most sort of significant days for music releases in, living memory. I think it's I'm not even sure the specific date. I think it's around about the 25th of September or 24th.
I thought it was the 26th.
It might be the 26th. It's that around that time, that week in September, anyway, of 1991, where four incredibly huge, significant records, rock records and hip hop records came out.
September 24th.
And that is the first one we're discussing today, Nirvana's Nevermind, the Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest, Bad Motor Finger by Soundgarden, and Blood Sugar Sex Magic by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And we'll be discussing each of those records in succession over the next 4 weeks, starting today with the biggest motherfucker of them all, culturally, Nirvana's Nevermind. And the way we're approaching this, and I'm going to lead into Morgan here in a minute because Morgan has to speak first on this, but I want to give a little bit of context. I don't need to contextualize who Nirvana are too much, but the thing that's interesting about this, us as a podcast, is the things that we value in music and the things that mean the most to us when we're talking about why music is meaningful, why music works, and why music is significant. And we do tend to take into account cultural impact as a thing that we discuss, but it's often less so than general music press. It's less of a focal point, I guess, in the way, because we're often talking about specific musical aspects that resonate with us. And the thing about Nirvana is that they exist situated in opposition to convention. They became the biggest grunge band commercially and culturally, and a lot of what they did was predicated on this idea of reacting against certain excessive and indulgent and commercial, is what they perceived as commercialized aspects of alternative rock culture. And their music therefore exists in this space where its whole context and its whole grounding is in this subversion. Whereas we as a podcast tend to be very fond of the music that this record is subverting, the really technical focused and technically impressive and emotionally powerful music that Nirvana exists in a kind of opposition to. There is technicality in Nirvana, sure, but they're kind of like anti-technical. They're kind of like a band that calls back to sort of punk aesthetics and the idea that technicality is not all that important. It's about thrashing. And also they kind of reject traditional sort of ideas of emotionality in music. Like it stands in stark opposition to Pearl Jam's 10, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is a deeply emotional record on a very surface level. Whereas Nevermind and Nirvana as a whole are much more postmodern, I think would be the way to describe them. There's a lot of irony. There's a lot of reaction against culture. There's a lot of snottiness and just general rebelliousness and disdain towards certain aspects of culture that have become commercialized that a lot of other bands that we love represent. And so that's an aspect of this record's legacy that we're going to be discussing today. And I think probably segues reasonably well into Morgan. What is your experience with Nirvana? How have you related to or not related to them, and this record in particular?
Yeah, it's a long, complicated history. Yeah, so it was freshman year of high school when my love for this band really peaked. I considered them my favorite band. In Utero was one of, if not my favorite album, although I didn't really think of things in that way at that point. But yeah, just full fucking angsty teenager, Nirvana's best band ever. I loved them, and to this day, I'm intimately familiar with pretty much everything they've ever done, which might go to some length to explaining my current disconnect from them, which to put it in basically to catch the audience up, it is well known that I hate Bleach, their debut album, and thoroughly do not care for In Utero at this point in time. As for Nevermind, I think it's really solid. You contextualized the things that this album is in opposition from as things that we often love, but a pretty key thing that that description did not take into consideration is that punk rock was my first love. It got to me way before progressive rock ever did. Just things where high technicality and in very intense musicianship is valued above most things. Punk was my first love, and I love it to this day. My favorite band is a punk band, as we speak. So there is an interesting disconnect there. And I think the place that I could start at elaborating on this disconnect is the first track. Why the fuck? I must acknowledge that overplay and overexposure plays into this to some degree, but I also I do not care for this song. I find the chord progression really dull. The verse has a nice atmosphere to it, and the chorus is going hard in the typical Nirvana fashion. So I can't. There's nothing I can really knock. I can definitely praise the shit out of Grohl adding the absolute backbone of that song with the rhythm that he chose. But I find the lyrics grating and sort of very smug and a little self-satisfied in tone. And I think I fucking hate the guitar solo. Like, if you do a guitar solo as a bit, fuck you. Learn to play your damn instrument. Get the fuck out of my house. And then following that is the song In Bloom, which is fucking masterful. It's again, Grohl is lighting up the kit. This is some of Cobain's most incisive and actually insightful lyricism. I think it's in particular based around his father, but in general, In Bloom is a sort of exploration of masculinity in the middle lower class America that Cobain grew up in. And I find it really cutting and incisive in that way. And it also just fucking goes. So this is essentially the dichotomy of my relationship with this record and the 1-2 punch of its opening. On the one hand, I find it self-satisfied and annoying, and on the other hand, it has moments of true incision and emotional weight, and it just fucking goes sometimes. So I'm left at a really strange crossroads of this record in particular, of enjoying most of it and almost never outright disliking any of it, except for some moments. It really just smells like Teen Spirit and Polly. I just find that song fucking whatever. This is just entirely anodyne to me. At any rate, so yeah, it's in a strange spot for me where there's a weird mixture of overexposure and really the fact that I am just tired of irony. And I find myself connecting much more with emotionally forthright music, emotionally forthright art in general, and this is not really that.
Yeah, I think it's an aspect that situates Nirvana pretty clearly in opposition to a lot of their contemporaries in a weird way, despite the fact that this general kind of like suburban dissatisfaction of the youth is something that is underpinning a lot of or all of this music. It manifests in these different ways, and but that aspect of this record being so paramount, this sort of sense of like ironic detachment from popular culture, is itself ironic, considering that this record would itself become an emblem of popular culture very quickly. And so I want to kind of pose the open question, I guess, and anyone can answer this who feels like they want to, is why do you think this record was so successful? Like, why do you think this was the record that broke grunge in this month where we have seminal releases from Pearl Jam and Soundgarden also?
But my answer is more an explanation of why this movement happened when it did, and that answer is Ronald Reagan. May he rest in peace. It's just it's a reaction to the very American Republican 80s government, and just a complete countercultural wave. As to why Nevermind was this sort of front runner for that, I think it is that mixture of heavy-handed irony and very, very blunt instrumentation in something like Smells Like Teen Spirit, and the moments of genuine insight on something like In Bloom. I think it is both of these things, whether you feel one way about them or another.
Yeah,
it really lends itself to the wave of authority questioning and subversion and general 90s of it all.
it's like, it's by far, I think, the most anarchic record and like band in this era. Like I think you don't really see other bands in this era trying to do what Nirvana is doing, and it almost feels like weird to even lump Nirvana in with these other bands that we've been talking about, because they have this clear interest in like expanding on certain aspects of heavy metal and 80s like extreme music culture, sort of turning it into this kind of darker, more dour, and more, I guess, exploratory thing that the 80s didn't really do, because it was a more kind of restricted two-dimensional time, I guess, to make a reductive statement. And so, yeah, you have bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden taking those kind of core aesthetics and then lathering them in this kind of real, aggressive, more youthful emotion, I guess. And then, but you have Nirvana, who do this kind of much more anarchic thing where it's not necessarily about like mourning some kind of great emotional state of being, rather than it's just literally just like throwing your hands up and making as much noise as possible within the culture and rebelling and all of that sort of stuff. And so Nirvana and Smells Like Teen Spirit as a song kind of exists as this forward mission statement of that represents all of those things.
I think my answer is very much in line with what Morgan said. I think he captured a lot of that very well in his answer. I think that punchiness, that immediacy to like the drum fill in Smells Like Teen Spirit, or to the at the start of Smells Like Teen Spirit, and the bass line to something like Come As You Are being one of the most like easy to play and just easy to imitate bass lines in all of music. It's something I think every person who picks up a bass guitar learns how to play Come As You Are as like one of their first 5 songs, because it's like it's a tricky enough pattern where it's challenging as like a very beginner, but it's also easy enough that you can get it down really well, really quickly. And that is a lot of this album as a whole, that the instrumentals themselves, the compositions are not terribly complex. And that can be argued, as I think Morgan said earlier, for like it feeling like a bit of a mockery, or like just a failed bit, like with the guitar solo on Smells Like Teen Spirit. But I think that's just so much, in part, so much of the principal appeal of this, that Nirvana was not just a band who played music or made music, but you too could become Nirvana through those very simple instrumentals. you could live out
Right.
that fantasy very easily and just pick it up and be a part of it, really. Whereas
I feel like that's part of the whole channeling of like punk rock in a way, and that like Nirvana and grunge as a whole came much more out of that scene in Chicago or Seattle, wherever they went. Seattle, thank you. Yeah, out of like a punk rock scene specifically, and Nirvana, I think, out of all of the grunge bands I've heard, embodied that attitude.
I think it helped that Nirvana and Kurt Cobain situated themselves within a political lens in a very kind of direct and anarchic way. Like that's a lot of what Kurt is remembered for as well, as his very progressive points of view. Like he's very adamant feminist and gay rights activist, and had this very kind of like left-wing political ideology that was a core part, not just a core part of his identity, but like a core philosophical aspect of the anarchic approach to music that Nirvana made. Like, and for a lot of people, it felt like they were reigniting and Americanizing a kind of initial English punk wave of the 70s as well.
I think that's a really great way to phrase it. And I know we've both seen the 1999 Woodstock documentary, in which they get into that aspect of Nirvana briefly, but importantly, it's the story of that album and the way in which they looked at gender roles specifically. And I think maybe not some of the most prominent bands in the original 70s British punk wave, but a lot of the British punk wave was to do with blending gender roles and sexuality and exploring different ways of expressing yourself in that way. And I feel like Nirvana bring that to 90s grunge in a way I still find really exciting.
Yeah, I think the failure for, I guess, popular rock music to build on that in the rest of the 90s is more, I think, a result of Kurt's death than anything to do with the music itself. Kurt's death in a sort of strange sense represented a kind of death of hope for the alternative to truly cut through in this progressive way, and the fallout left you in this completely opposing cultural space, which is, a part of the tragedy. But I think the thing with Nevermind is that its success and its impact really don't have anything to do with Kurt's death. You can kind of discuss it apart from what else would follow. And
I mean, like when you look at like the grunge albums that were contemporary to this, there's a lot more focus on technical ability, if that makes, even though this is a very technically accomplished record. Like if you look at like Pearl Jam's 10, that's a record with a lot more technical virtuosity on display than Nevermind.
That's an attribute that I would just attribute to Nirvana in general. Like all three of their records are technically quite basic. The performances are emphatic in terms of all three members of the band, especially on a record like In Utero, which is like almost like, well, in terms of alongside that Steve Albini production, that record is basically like abrasive as hell, yet it's simple.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I kind of love about In Utero.
Yeah.
But like famously with like Dave Grohl's drumming, he is described as the most reliable drummer to play the same thing without variation, take to take.
Yeah.
Which is part of why the recording of the drums is so specific on this record, because you can put them in one recording space assigned to record one particular specific drum across the kit. And then you can put them, like you can record the bass, the kick drum in one room and the snare drum in another room. And Dave Grohl will play the same drum pattern exactly the same way, room to room. And you can essentially stitch the recordings together perfectly because he has that control. So that's what I mean when I say that this is a very technically accomplished album, but it sounds in like very punk rock in that way. They're playing very straightforward things.
So what do you guys think of the songs themselves then on this record? We may as well start talking about the songs themselves. August, what stood out to you about the music when listening to this record?
What stood out to me about the songs is that I thought I was a lot more familiar with this album than I was, because, it's like I in a sense, I had never properly listened to this album before this week, because I was just like, oh, never mind, Nirvana. I've heard all the songs played through this and that. And I kind of had, but I also kind of hadn't, because what I really got sitting down and listening to this album was this Nirvana have a real, at least on this album, real like pop sensibility to them, honestly. They've got very strong like verse chorus structures to all of their songs. They're very well defined in that front. They make these exciting hooks, and also I think Kurt, just as a central vocalist, brings so much energy and charges these songs up in a way where it's like whoa, that's crazy.
That I wanted to comment on something Morgan said, which is that what Morgan said about the kind of acts Nirvana were a riposte to, in a way. Like, as I get older, I appreciate why those acts are good more and more, but I still always just respond to the thing they were doing, which is basically saying, like, at that point where rock music was such a like cock rock space, and they were bringing it back so far, and I always respond to that because I have such a like late 80s rock I've never really liked, and they seem such a like
here's the thing
that.
to keep into account as well. This came out the same month as Guns N' Roses' massive first 2-part double album blowout, Use Your Illusion, which was one of their most commercially successful records of the 90s, I believe. And so we're not reviewing that for obvious reasons, but it stands in stark opposition to something like this within the same month, right? And it's a beautiful encapsulation of exactly what you were saying, is that, yeah, a lot of the scene is a riposte to the blown out indulgences of bands like hair metal bands and all that sort of stuff. But no one did it with the bluntness. No one did it with the in-your-face aggression of Nirvana. And there's something to be said for the pop nature of this record that August commented on as well, the really kind of conventional structure that it has. And it's kind of like this subversive thing where it is the reason that no one ever accuses Nirvana of selling out with Nevermind is the fact that what it represents and what they're clearly doing is exactly the inverse, really. What they're doing is they're using conventional song structures and pop sensibilities to sneak in these subversive, anti sort of countercultural anthems that had that effect, right, of fostering that new counterculture and making it mainstream in a way that obviously would never be able to last forever, but made that individual moment so vital and meaningful for a youth culture at that point in time, especially, as Morgan said, to tie it back to him as well, like in the wake of the Reagan era. And so you have this record that comes along at the perfect time, that capitalizes on that general malaise and feeling among youth and among like people our age at that time who had experienced some of the Reagan years consciously, actually needing this cultural vessel for their feelings and getting this, and the same sort of countercultural things happening in cinema and independent cinema at the same sort of time as well, with Tarantino and Linklater too. So you have all of this. It's this perfect melting pot, boiling point time. And Nirvana's Nevermind is the record that just perfectly knows exactly how to capitalize on it in all of these really hard-hitting immediate ways.
And yeah, lyrically, a lot of what it also speaks to a lot of this rejection of just normalcy enforced upon you by this very Republican kind of government, with like Breed being a track that comes to mind, of just kind of poking fun at this idea of just the need to have kids to fulfill some void in your life, and just kind of referring to like other things you can do, like in the chorus, just having this part where he goes through these like other like alternatives for like just things, ways to live that are just beyond this like conventional nuclear family dynamic, which was so like lauded after in the Reagan years.
I mean, just on an instrumental level, Breed is one of my favorite tracks on this whole record. I love the sort of blues minor key note coupled with Dave Grohl's like epileptic drumming on this song.
You also
the way
get,
he does the drum fill, it's like
he's so
iconic.
gnarly. You also get that musically and thematically as well on a song like Territorial Pissings as well, which I think is another one of the harder hitting moments on this record, where it's essentially just this kind of thrashing rager of a song that, you know, has this sort of subtle, seedy commentary underpinning it that makes it so much more. I think those songs are more impactful than a lot of the later songs on this record, where it's sort of like Drain You and Lounge Act, which are more upfront about Kurt Cobain's relationship with Bikini Kill drummer Toby Vale. I find slightly less interesting, even though those songs are quite musically compelling. And there is a certain extent to which this record does have like, it is musically simple by its nature, and as a way to kind of make sure the songs kind of seep into the public consciousness in a way that makes them linger and focuses them more around hookiness than complexity. And this is something that Jake has commented on in Jake's notes for this review that I want to read, as well as being a limitation of this record for him. He describes it as at points feeling like minor variations on the same musical idea, with there being a uniformity in sound and theme that make for a monochromatic listening experience. Jake points out that
that's funny, because I wrote something like very similar to that in my notes about a lot of musical ideas sounding very similar.
Yeah, and I'll share some more of Jake's thoughts, and you can probably build on them. Yeah. August. Jake points out that there are a lot of songs here that do sound quite similar to one another. They're sequenced really, really well, which I agree with as well. I think the sequencing is one of the best strengths of this record. I particularly like the way that both sides of this album end on a somber but unsettling acoustic ballad. And Jake points out nicely that it's a great example of an album of fundamentals being fleshed out and executed with aplomb, but definitely with there being a sense that Nirvana are almost holding back from their potential as a result of trying to make this kind of record. That, you know, that's a sacrifice, I guess, that they make that ended up working out for them, but it does limit to Jake, and I think to me as well, although I don't quite feel this way to the same extent, but it does limit the replayability and impact of Nevermind as it ages. Jake points out that the one-dimensional thematic core of this record has never sat right with him, and it feels like its accessibility cheapens its grunge typical angst, resentment, and struggle that it very much wants to have. Nevermind is an album that Jake feels only really suffers in the context of grunge as a whole, which I think is important to mention in a retrospective like this. None of the album, in Jake's words, none of the album's darkest moments feel as committed or bleak as the material you'd find on 10. The sound of the album isn't nearly as singular or innovative as anything Soundgarden would make, and its balance of punchy but still accessible commercial sound doesn't give it the grit, incisiveness, or instrumental personality that the Alice in Chains records had around this time. So those are, I think, some key and valid limitations of this record. My feeling is more that some of those aspects of limited complexity and repetition are kind of a bit of a trade-off that I think the record makes reasonably smartly, and its punchiness goes some distance to protecting against the negative effects that might have. But August, I'm sure you have feelings on this too.
I just want to comment before, I'm sorry, August, but I just want to say that I feel like I feel uncomfortable comparing this to other grunge records in a way, because like, sure, it's part of the same scene and sound, and like, I get that, of course I do, but what it's going for is like completely different than any grunge record I have ever heard. And I want to take it much more on the terms of what it wants to be, which is essentially basically like a punk rock record for teens that would grow up to be emos in the 90s.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid counterpoint as well. Something I kind of tried to bring up a little bit earlier too, and I know I'm trying to play both sides here a little bit, but there's like certain aspects of it, like aspects of its personality, aspects of its grit, aspects of its punchiness that I suppose Jake feels other bands execute with more flair and power. And yet again, you're right that Nevermind exists as this individualistic statement that doesn't gel with the other things around it, and that a lot of its power comes from the ways in which it is different from and singular and representative of a riposte of the things that again we often espouse as being these, you know, layered and dense and beautiful and intricate things. And so there's a place for it.
It's not like I don't celebrate like technical virtuosity and all that shit, right? Of course I love that, but Nevermind exists in a place where like you listen to like a 1988, 1989 record, you talk about Guns N' Roses that released in this year as well. And it's like the beauty of this record is that when you like are familiar with the context it's released in, it's like, yeah, this represents everything. At least for me, I don't know about you guys, it represents everything for me that like I hate about late 80s rock, you know?
Sure. August, what do you think about this?
I don't know. I mean, I think what I come back to is this idea that's kind of been floated around in culture for some time now. The notion that the term grunge, in a sense, is kind of meaningless, where it refers not really to a genre, but more to just a particular scene of musicians all working, of course, in the same city to achieve a similar enough end goal of like this capturing of angst. And this is something we mentioned in our Smashing Pumpkins video, where like the scene of grunge was like 5 different bands who sounded nothing alike each other, nothing much like each other, who are all kind of conveniently lumped under the same kind of tag, the same label. So that's, and I guess it's kind of an encapsulation of where I stand on that in general, and that I don't really see this album as being too dishonest to the movement. I see it as being a part of the movement, just in its own different way. I see where Jake is coming from with that point. And certainly there's a lot that Nirvana's contemporaries do kind of just objectively superior to them, but I also wouldn't say that therefore demeans what they're going for on this record and what they accomplish on this record.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I think that that's probably a good way of reconciling the different ways of approaching and seeing this record in its context. One song I want to talk about that I feel doesn't get talked about too much, that's one of my favorite songs on this record that I think encapsulates the strengths of Nirvana and of Kurt Cobain specifically as a songwriter, and its minimalism, is the closing track on this record, Something in the Way, which I absolutely love. It's easily a top 3 song on this record for me.
Gosh, yes, it is. That song, awesome.
It's just a few lines repeated over and over again of Kurt trying to conjure and capture this idea of existing as a vagrant in this kind of space that has forgotten you. And it's beautifully like a little wee parable about sort of societal rejection as a subtext, but also just like existing in an isolation and in a place of distance from the rest of the world around you. And it manages to get that idea across, like as a subtext beneath the surface, through just this very elementally simple story and image of this single person. and this acoustic guitar and gentle string line, and it's just minimalist perfection. And I love that the record ends in this way as well. It feels like such a curveball. And yeah, I can tell you're pretty passionate about this song too, August.
Yeah, I really love this this as a closer. I think it's like this really just it feels like almost haunting and ghostly. We kind of get this description of this almost like vagrant kind of character who's very much living kind of unencumbered by society from moment to moment, from meal to meal. It's this real kind of almost defeatist portrait of just like being crushed by the world and finding some escape from that. Like the line that really haunts me is that it's okay to eat fish because they don't have any feelings. And while that's a little heavy-handed, I think it's kind of this really interesting look at this kind of brashness, this kind of just putting something aside and just dehumanization in general. I think it's a really it's a really beautiful gut punch to the dick of a song.
Yeah, it's just so morose. Those single acoustic chords that are strummed in this really kind of like funereal way, they sound so like dead and deadened. And it's just like, again, it's this perfect final knife twist of a record that is predicated upon subversion. And yeah, and it shows that for all of the, talk of Cobain's irony and postmodern viewpoint of America or whatever, that at the heart of it, he can be an emotional songwriter when he wants to be.
Absolutely.
And that you can actually use a lot of the surrealist imagery and lyricism that Kurt uses to actually communicate quite a powerful feeling.
With Kurt Cobain, I feel like every ironic thing in any of their lyrics is there not just to be ironic, but to hint at like something about life that is so deeply sincere that Kurt felt. I don't ever want to dismiss what Kurt Cobain has to say as just being like an ironic post,
Well, what you're speaking to is the reason why he's endured as this mythic figure that so many people have this connection to. And I think he was on track to do that even before he died. But obviously his death has magnified and intensified the way in which that's, happened for people generally. But people feel this profound connection to Kurt because he sings and speaks in a way that understands the disconnected, dark way that people see the world, but also the tender feeling that is underneath that people cover up as a defense mechanism. And it's beautifully real and true, and it's aspects of his personality that can be seen in a lot of the great alternative music figures who've endured in the time since.
Right.
And
I find the honesty in Kurt Cobain's lyricism as to the complexity and darkness of being alive with conflicting ideas of who you are and what life means to be the most deeply relatable lyricism that I found in maybe the whole of alternative rock ever. And he is so frank and honest. And I feel like, look, you can, I've always felt like people who want to sort of talk shit on Nevermind, it's a slightly like, although this publication would love this album, it's always felt like slightly like enemy opinion to me.
It's almost like to an extent, it's kind of like partly also a reaction to the godlike esteem with which Kurt Cobain is held. So look, it's a difficult line to tread, but what you are speaking to is emblematic of how so many people feel. And my first exposure to Nirvana was a high school girlfriend who had a gigantic poster of Kurt Cobain on her bedroom wall. And that right there tells, and this was a person who was, 15 in the year 2011. So, and Kurt Cobain had been dead for 17 years at that point. And so that tells you the lasting impact that he has had and the significance that he'll always have for young people, so long as there's a world where young people are made to feel the way that they feel. And that shows you how little has changed, I guess, in the world, and how, I guess, permanent and almost a rite of passage feeling this way and connecting with Nirvana and Kurt in this way is. I mean, Morgan himself said at the top of this video that Nirvana were his favorite band at a certain point, and that's because when this stuff hits, when you encounter that at the right time, it is literally the voice of a generation, and nothing can take that away from it.
And I think part of why I love Nirvana's music is that all three albums form like an act in a story that ends tragically, and the theme of that tragedy is whatever you want to see in it as a young person.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can even reconceptualize it as the first act that ends tragically in a story that has a more positive ending, because I know, and I don't think it's a reach to say, that a lot of your favorite songwriters, people like John Daniel and Laura Jane Grace and all that sort of thing, a lot of what makes them iconic and a lot of what they reach for through their art can be found in Kurt Cobain, can be found as having been popularized by Kurt Cobain, or not popularized, but like connecting to young people who are on the fringes in a way that no other frontman had with this intensity and power before. And particularly in terms of this milestone closing the door on a long history of a classical era of rock music and moving into what we think of now as the future. So obviously that's context dependent as well. And Nirvana are undeniably a classic rock band if you want to think about the wider scope of classic rock. But still, it represents this moment that then has fed into just about every single iconic, lauded, musical front person ever since. So, yeah.
You've just captured so many of my thoughts beautifully. So good job.
All right. Well, I think that was a beautiful way of summing it up. Let's move into our favorite tracks and ratings then. I have Jake's here as well. Jake's favorite songs on Nevermind are Lithium, Breed, and Something in the Way. And Jake's least favorite is Polly, and Jake gives it a 6.5 out of 10. August.
My three favorite songs on here are going to be Something in the Way, Breed, and Come As You Are. Least favorite is going to be I'll say Polly. I don't know, it's not amazing. I'd give it a 7 out of 10.
All right, Morgan has provided us with his favorite tracks and rating too. His favorite tracks are Territorial Pissings, Lithium, and In Bloom. Least favorite, Polly, and Morgan gives it a 7 also.
My favorites are Smells Like Teen Spirit, because I'm basic, but it rules. Lithium, sounds too good. Breed, and I'll include a fourth, Something in the Way. And my least favorite is a bonus track, Endless Nameless, which sucks arse. And I'll give this a 9.
All right. My three favorite tracks are, my favorite track is Lithium, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and Something in the Way. And oh God, I just realized I didn't include In Bloom, which was my favorite song on this record for a number of years, but there we go. And my least favorite track is probably Breed, weirdly enough, despite the fact that it gets a lot of love in this chat, which I'm happy for. I don't particularly dislike it. It's just if I had to pick one. And I give it an 8.
Okay, so that's an average of 7.5, which is equivalent to a couple of records. The Eminem Show by Eminem,
Good
and
album.
that's it.
Wow, that's a bit of a kick in the teeth. No, that's the sort of chaos we thrive on. But anyway, let us know at home what Nirvana's Nevermind means to you. Is there any aspects of this record you think we failed to cover? Any songs that you want to add to the discussion on? We love hearing from you. We love hearing you build on what we say in the comments below. So please do that. Make sure you like and subscribe if you have not already as well. Really helps us out. There's also a link in the description to our playlist of 1991 retrospective videos. So if you want to check out what we have had to say on Pearl Jam's 10, REM's Out of Time, Massive Attack's Blue Lines, all of those albums we've talked about already, then you can check that out. Next week, we'll be back again to talk about Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger. So make sure you stick around for that. That's going to be a really good one as well. And
yeah, if I could just say something real quick, because this is my last running video.
I was about to say that, but yeah, you can lead into it if you want.
Okay, yeah, this is my last video as an official regular host of the Jams D podcast. And I would say that, like, when I joined this podcast, I thought that I've since been alleviated of this thought, but I thought that I was essentially a tag along, and I was very insecure about what I thought about music. I essentially listened to one genre and that was it. And over the year and change that I've done this podcast, I have discovered jazz and so much more, and I've fallen in love with beautiful aspects of music that I would never have thought of, and I've loved that, and it's built me as a person. And I will happily come back if you ever want me, but just what I've already done has been a beautiful time, and I'm incredibly happy to have done it.
And we're incredibly happy to have had you, and incredibly grateful for all that you've done for us as well. Like, let that not be said. And I'm pleased that we could have ended today on a couple of records. I mean, one obviously that was planned because it means a lot to you, but we've ended up doing 2 that mean a lot to you. So, and this Nevermind really representing in a lot of ways a lot of what you value in music and culture. So that's beautiful. And I'm fucking thrilled that we could do that for you and with you, both of those things. So yeah, but yeah, obviously this will not be the last time you see Saoirse with us or on this channel. I mean, the amount of records that we cover, the amount of music that we do, honestly, it's kind of staggering actually how prolific we are. So it's inevitable that Saoirse will return, but it's been wonderful, and the seat is always there for you whenever you want to come back as well. Okay, well, as always, folks,
rock over London, rock on Chicago, Gerber, anything for your baby.
I love it. That was great.